to our series about myths about learning. Today, let's look at whether rereading and underlining help us retain information we've read. Today, let's look at methods that we may have used as students. Methods we may also be encouraging our students to use because they may have worked well for us. In fact, I know at least one or two of these worked well for me, and I feel a little attached to it, although now I know it's not perhaps the most effective. Specifically, we're going to look at highlighting and underlining, rereading, and note-taking. Then we will look at some other ways students might effectively study the written materials for their classes. A group led by Professor John Dunlosky conducted a meta-study of 700 scientific articles on 10 commonly used learning techniques and shared the most and least effective of these. Several others have, of course, undertaken further study of their findings, and much of what I'll be discussing in this video comes from that research. First, let's look at highlighting and underlining. As discussed by P.D. Colbert, one advantage of highlighting and underlining is that they take little time and preparation. However, as he states, students are better able to remember information that they have highlighted and underlined, but this effect is negated because students are often unable to correctly identify the most important parts of a text when deciding what to highlight. Additionally, students who highlight often then focus only on the highlighted portions of their text when they go back to study. To quote an unattributed blog post from UNC Chapel Hill's Learning Center, rereading in this way can contribute to illusions of competence, the feeling that we know more than we actually know. Why? After looking at content that's phrased a particular way and presented on the same part of a page a couple of times, that content can pretty quickly become familiar to a reader. Many of us confuse this familiarity with a good understanding of the material. And even if we remember or even understand these highlighted nuggets, there's no indication that we're seeing the bigger picture and are able to apply, analyze, or evaluate the material, the types of higher order thinking that professors usually invoke in their exam questions. Also, as pointed out by the same authors, most textbooks already highlight key concepts and materials, and simply highlighting what they have already highlighted won't help you learn. They recommend that if students are going to highlight, they read through the material first and then go back and highlight, and that they pay attention to how the textbook is organized and how the highlighted materials relate to one another and to other key concepts. Other suggestions include limiting yourself to highlighting one sentence per paragraph, highlighting keywords, or writing notes in the margins to summarize what you have highlighted. These same authors point out that rereading more than once does not improve learning, but as P.D. Colbert points out, it's easy. Unfortunately, it also leads to the illusion of mastery or the illusion of competence. Other findings about rereading note that rereading is most effective when there is a time lag between the two readings, and that combining rereading with some other strategies we'll get to later will be more effective. Note-taking is something that I did faithfully as a student, and I believed that it really helped me learn. I have also emphasized the value of note-taking to my own students. Unfortunately, not all note-taking is created equally, and some note-taking is just ineffective. One of the most common forms of note-taking, bulleting, that is, putting notes in bulleted lists, is probably the least effective. In general, verbatim note-taking, whether of a lecture or from a textbook, is ineffective, especially if the notes are not reviewed. And if the format and practice of the note-taking doesn't align with the material being learned, the note-taking will not be helpful. For example, copying diagrams faithfully into notes may not be a good use of time if the goal is to learn to label the parts of the diagram, not to draw the diagram itself. Another form of note-taking, outlining, is also common. However, if students aren't trained in outlining, this can be ineffective. Teacher-generated outlines are beneficial, as are skeletal outlines provided by the instructor that students can fill in later. In fact, these have been shown to be quite effective. If possible, provide these to students before class. Other structured note-taking methods, like the Cornell note-taking method, also force students to process the text rather than simply copying down information, and so they can be useful. As for whether notes are best handwritten or typed, although some studies have shown that handwritten notes aid learning more, there are advantages and disadvantages to both, and for students with motor skill challenges, dysgraphia, or other issues with handwriting, typing is definitely the best option. As for summarizing, it may or may not be effective according to Dunlosky et al. Even if it is effective, there may be other approaches that will better aid in learning. This leads us to strategies that were identified as being extremely useful for studying. Based on quite a bit of research shared in the notes on this video, these are two methods of study that appear to be the most useful. Practice tests or self-tests. We already know that many textbooks offer practice questions, and there are many apps out there for practicing. However, students can also make their own practice tests. Flashcards are one of the oldest types of practice tests. Another thing students could do, if they use the Cornell method of note-taking, they can cover up the column with notes, leaving only the topics or subjects, and then try to remember as much as they can. Or students can construct test questions as they read, which they then can come back later, maybe even days or weeks later. Distributed practice is closely related to spaced learning, which was covered in an earlier video. You might want to go back and check that video out. Spacing out practice or study sessions over days or ideally even weeks has been shown to increase learning and retention. According to one study, peak performance came when sessions were spaced at about 10 to 20% of the retention interval. So, for example, to remember something for 1 week, learning episodes should be about 12 to 24 hours apart. To remember something for 5 years, they should be spaced 6 to 12 months apart. I encourage you to, again, go back and check out that spaced learning video, talk to your students about which of these methods they're currently using, and maybe help them strategize. If you encourage your students to take notes, I would recommend that you talk to them about how they're taking notes, the note-taking methods they're using, and maybe help them to become a little more effective with their note-taking.